We're good then?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Good. So with that, we'll call the meeting to order at 6:01. Welcome everyone to the committee of the whole for December 5th, 2022. First item, adoption of the agenda. Can we have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilor Willis.
The name that.
And I should just double check, no changes to the agenda. Perfect. So with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is passed. Disclosure of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof. For open and or closed tonight. Is there any declaration? Seeing none, closed session. So for the audience, it'll be about an hour and a half of closed session. For the purpose of education and training. So could I have a motion to go into closed session? Councilor Project, seconded by Councilor Budrick. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is passed. And we are now in closed session.
To you, Tony, I will have this up. You have an introduction at the back, right? You do that later? Okay.
So we're on fire now.
Yeah.
Okay. It's one of those things that we use.
Is it working, Governor?
I just want to make sure it wasn't going out. One of those blue blues.
It's showing the
It's just. It's showing that. Motion is passed. There's a presentation that you're.
Yes.
Okay.
Should be up there now. Yeah.
I'll just yell at you. Cool.
Just turn it over to you then.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I stand here, I think that's probably easiest, but I have a screen that I can see as well. But maybe if you could move to the next slide, please. So what I wanted to talk to council tonight about is about 5 different general topics, a little bit on municipal liability, talk about council meetings open and closed, we'll do conflict of interest, we'll also do MFIPA, and then land
Rise and report. Session meeting was held and only closed session items identified were discussed in closed session and that there is nothing further to report. And that's it.
You could just say it's an education.
And it was,
Yeah, an
okay,
education.
yes, it was an educational session. Moved by Councilor Broderick, seconded by Councilor Anderson. Any comments? Seeing none, call a question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is passed.
I don't know what procedural, but you have a bathroom break?
Yes, just, we'll recess for 5 minutes then.
Yeah. Thank you.
Everybody. Oh, I better check with you. We could put that live then, Trevor? Okay. Okay. After the 5-minute recess, we're back and we're to item number 5.1, staff report for the recreation and leisure programming locations in Odessa. And I believe the director has a presentation or information, or will delegate whoever is going to be speaking.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, I will delegate, and Carrie Lamb, the manager of recreation facilities, will provide a brief presentation for you.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Right, just bringing it up on the screen.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
Thank you, Richard. So this evening, we're here to talk to you a bit about recreation programming in Odessa specifically. However, I'm going to share some information about just where we do programming throughout the municipality, throughout the township. So if you go to the next slide, Trevor. So the purpose tonight is in response to a request from council to look at spots in Odessa specifically to host some recreation programs. With the growing community, there was a request that we look at what offerings are in this area. And so tonight we're going to share some of that information with you. Next. So before we get into the location, I thought it important to talk a bit about how we determine the cost of a program. And when a program is in a township facility, the only expenses that we consider in a participant registration would be the instructor costs and any materials and supplies. So if it's a cooking course, it could be the expenses for the food to do the course. An art program, obviously, would be things like paints and craft supplies and things of that sort. So that's when it's in a township facility. If it's in a township, if it's not in a township facility and the facility costs us money, we in turn put that expense back to the registrant. So the registration fees cover those three things: instructor fees, facility rentals, and the materials and supplies. What isn't covered is any recovery costs on township and facilities and any administration costs. So it could be somebody with my position, Lori's position, custodial services, any of those types of things are not recovered through registration fees. Those are all subsidized through the budget. So with that in mind, these are the program locations that we currently, both in fall and or winter coming up, are using for recreation programming. So you can see it's quite a list in all 4 communities. We do depend on the Limestone District School Board. So you can see obviously in Amherst-View, the Leisure and Activity Center, the W.J. Henderson Recreation Center, Amherst-View Public School, and Fairfield Public School. We will at the odd time go into Mount Carmel if needed, but there are gym facilities quite a bit smaller and it's very difficult for us to run programming in there. We do on the island work with the Amherst Island Recreation Committee, and we utilize the school on the island. In Bath, we utilize the Discovery Center for some smaller, I'll say non-active programs, as well as this public school, St. John's Hall when it's available. It's a very busy hall. And Layer Cake Hall starting in the spring. We actually have had some meetings with the library and looking at how can we co-share that space a bit more. In Odessa right now, we do depend on the public school as well as the high school. And we have tried to do some programming at Wilton Hall. It has not gone over great yet. It's a new offering. So we've had one program run successfully there, and that summer we'll continue to try to run programming. But from what we're covering, it's all dependent on the day, the time, and who you're catering to. So that one's a trial and error right now. So with that in mind, when we're looking at locations, we did do some tours of some facilities. We were looking for things like this. Is it access location by participants? So how long do they have to travel to get to the location? Is there transportation? And what would that look like? Is there parking on site? Is there washrooms, change rooms, depending on the type of program we're offering? Accessibility obviously is a big one. Availability of the space to rent. And then other amenities, things like if depending on the type of program you're running, is there a kitchen? Is there a quiet space? So for children's programmings, a lot of times we like to have a spot where if we need to, we can have a quiet space that a child can go to if they're a little, just needing a bit of quiet time and maybe a little overwhelmed. So with that in mind, again, we looked at 3 locations. We looked at a couple of churches, and then we also looked at the Odessa Agricultural Society, and you can see the benefits there. The Odessa Agricultural Society staff felt was the best fit, both from a parking perspective, accessibility, availability, cost, and it is adjacent to Skater Park, which we already operate. So throughout the year, if we're wanting to run some co-programming both inside and outside, that availability is there. So what staff are proposing is that we move forward with a trial in 2023. We secure space at the Odessa Agricultural Society for 37 weeks, which is on average, when you look at going from session to session, you run that fall session, a winter 2 session, spring and summer. We do 1 day a week, 2 programs a day. Art programs for children is where we were going to start with. We would then throughout the year review the program and determine the success of it. And then from there, we would then look at, can we expand on the offering and what would that look like? We will, throughout the year, offer some one-off adult programs. So there are times where we don't offer a 10 session once a week program. We might offer a 1 night, 2-hour program for adults. And we would try some of those adult programs at that location as well. The Odessa Agricultural Society is on board and supports the partnership, which is great to see. As I speak to partnerships, I thought it important that we talk a bit about this tonight. We do currently have quite a few different partnerships that we are working with. BGC Southeast is one of them. So if you're experienced with our children's summer camps, PD day camps, holiday camps, those things, we no longer offer those through the township. We've partnered with BGC Southeast and they are running those on our behalf as a partnership. In the summer, this past summer, they were in Amherstview and Bath. The goal next summer is to include Odessa. The reason Odessa was not included this summer is they are also dependent on the schools, and the Odessa Public School was under construction this past summer. But they are looking to move forward with all 3 locations this summer. With that partnership, they've been able to expand the offering. Traditionally, we would offer camp in Amherstview up to 100 children out of Amherstview Community Hall, which is a very tight space for 100 kids. They will run 100 children out of each location, serving 300 kids a week. 1 in Amherstview, 1 in Bath, 1 in Odessa. Lennox and Addington, the Youth Hub. This is a group that we have, the team was partnering with them leading into COVID. During COVID, they did some kit pickups so that the kids could be doing some programming at home. And now what we're doing is they're partnering with us and they're using the Amherstview Community Hall to host monthly events for youth. That's what that partnership is. Loyalist Family Health Team, we partner with them for their 12 Weeks to Change program, where Mike, our one of our fitness instructors, he's our recreation programmer. He will actually do some teaching for them with the fitness program. And then we also have some other partnerships. Interesting years, they actually rent space at the Leisure and Activity Center. And what this is a seniors group that comes in and plays cards twice a week. But we actually help programs set up, welcome their guests and make sure they're comfortable. We have been meeting with them to talk about how that partnership can grow and how we can make it easier for them as seniors. The Vaughan does use space at the hall as well as at times the Leisure and Activity Center, depending on availability. And that's part of the free use program through the township. And then we have started to have conversations with the Kingston Seniors Association. And we actually did, the end of the summer, we did some tours with them through some of the facilities throughout the township. And then we got into the fall. We haven't been able to regroup back for that partnership, but that's something in 2023 that staff are looking at. So given all this information, staff are recommending that we move forward with offering some rentals or some programming at the Odessa, the Agricultural Society. And it's a $3,000 expense in the budget, but there's the offsetting revenue at the same time. So as much as it is an initial expense, that cost would be recovered through program registration. So that is the report regarding the Odessa recreation programming. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. So council, I just want to remind people too that this is committee of the whole. We're very relaxed here. That's why we're down here. So this is a chance for us to freely discuss the items as they come up, and once it's decided here, like with this recommendation, if it went through, it would have to still be approved by council to actually be in effect. But which works in a case like this because it would be going for the draft budget for council's consideration anyway. But this is just a good place for us to make sure that we're all comfortable, that we understand, and all of our questions are answered. So the level of parliamentary procedure is lowered substantially here. So we'll feel free to have a discussion. And Councillor Broderick,
I read over the report, and I'm pleased to see some of the things that were there weren't in the thing, or maybe I missed them, but just a few comments. So providing, I'm making the assumption, providing any kind of activity in Odessa will bring kids that aren't involved anywhere in the township right now. Is that fair to say? Like, we're not going to draw from Amherstview or on this thing?
We'll try to.
You know, like, we're not going to be splitting a program, like, you know, that fair to say?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, the idea would be that we're attracting new participants to the program.
Okay, couple of things, just as I read down, like the communication plan, have you considered, and I don't, maybe it's happening, I don't know, but when I was in education, the great vehicle for young people's program is through the schools, through their monthly newsletter. And I know the principal, I appreciated when the city of Kingston sent us thing, and it's just another avenue that, you know, I would think most principals would want to know things that for their kids going on.
Did you want to comment on that?
I can, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I can say that our recreation program coordinator, Susan McNeil, does have a good relationship with the school administrators. Our goal is to get at least some type of information sent home, even if it's through their website or the newsletter for each school. Through COVID, it was a bit difficult, but we continue to try coming post-pandemic to see what information we can get sent.
Okay. Great. Okay. You actually answered most of my questions already, but just one comment or question. The Interesting Years Club, they were used to be in Collins Bay, I believe, and offering the cards. Is that like any of those programs? Is there information on the township website about that? Because I know that having a parent who's a senior, they're looking for card activities in Amherstview during the day, and I wasn't aware of this, and sounds like a good opportunity.
Through you, Mr. Chair. That's an excellent point. The Interesting Years program isn't necessarily ours, so I don't believe the information is directly on the website, but that's something we can certainly get that information loaded. The question I would challenge my staff back to is will our seniors find it on the website? And if not, what's the better way to get to them? Sorry, go ahead.
Leads into my next question, using church bulletins, church weekly things, because that's where a lot of seniors are. I can tell you, 5 o'clock at Amherstview masses. I'm the youngest guy and I'm 61. I would, and I don't know if this is good. I would support the recommendation of staff.
Thank you. Other members? Okay. Councillor Weiss.
First, I think it's great that you're increasing programming in Odessa and responding to the review. The Boys and Girls Club camps, what's the minimum number of registrants they need for that to break even?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the Boys and Girls Club BGT Southeast, they are a high five accredited organization. So what that means is through the provincial standard, they will meet the minimum requirements as it relates to the ratio of children and staff per age group. So let's say it's 5 to 8-year-olds, 9 to 11-year-olds. I'm just throwing some ages out there right now. There's a certain ratio of number of staff to number of children that they would require. They would never offer a camp with no less than at least 2 staff. You always need that extra staff person to ensure that if an incident occurs, if a child has some sensory issues and needs to have some quiet time, that a staff member can be removed from the group safely while the rest of the group continues to do their programming. So they will follow those types of minimum standards. Outside of that, I would have to get BGC Southeast to respond to that, and I can certainly do that for you. I know in our PD day camps, for instance, they're running at about 20 kids to make it worthwhile. The challenge is also right now, no different than anybody else, is finding the staff. Yeah, so I can certainly definitely get that information. I believe there's some interest on Amherst Island for summer camp to return. So, and I believe years ago it was there, and it's disappeared as age groups change. But that's something we can certainly look into.
That's great. Thank you.
Satisfied your question?
Yes, thank you.
Anyone else have questions? Councilor Parks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Staff, thank you again for bringing this back. This was something that was brought forward to the previous council, so appreciate the time that's been taken to bring this forward. Just wondered, so what the costs, if you have an idea what the cost would be to the residents that would be using the program to enroll the children?
That would solely depend on the program itself. So is it 8 weeks? Is it 10 weeks? Is it an art program, or is it a games and activity program where there's little materials and supply cost? Some instructors will cost $18 an hour and others will cost $28 an hour depending on the specialty. So most of our recreation programs will range anywhere from $60 for an 8-week program up to about $120. It is very reasonably cost. You know, when you break it down to per night fees, it's a very minimal fee. We try to keep it as affordable as possible. And when we get into a next report, one of the things in 2023 we're looking at is an access to recreation policy, which is affordable access to recreation. So that's something that will be coming down the pipe soon. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other members have questions? Discussion? Seeing none. We do have a recommendation before us. To receive and to direct staff to include the cost of operating additional recreation and leisure program offering in Odessa in the 2023 draft operating budget for council consideration. So council, how do you wish? Councilor Parks. So moved. Do we have a seconder? Councilor Reyes. Mover, any comments?
I just think that being able to offer more programs for our residents is great.
Thank you. Councilor Reyes.
Thank you. Pleased to support this recommendation to increase some programming in Odessa as a convenient location for the residents of Odessa, as well for rural residents who, for many, that's probably the most convenient location for a good chunk of our rural population. I remember the delegation that brought this forward. It was a young mother recently moved here looking for something to do with her kids. So good for the resident bringing it forward, and thanks to staff for following up and bringing this report to the committee.
Thank you. Other members of council, any comments? I'll just briefly make a statement that I'm again, thanks to staff for bringing this forward. We're going down a very positive path, I think, like Councilor Park said. The more involvement, the more activity, the more engagement we can have at the younger ages. I think it carries through when they become our age. But it also is, it's great for the social interaction as well. So I think that's a great investment. I liked the comments about the seniors looking, we've kind of got a plan right now, but we're looking down the road as well and looking to improve. And I know that that's one area that someone like Councillor Frederick, at one point I was looking for senior activities or a family member, and it's great when you can find them, and you can find them right at home. And I guess when it comes to something like this, $3,000 to get this off the ground, to partner with somebody that's already been a great partner on other avenues, I see it as an investment. So thank you. So with that, back to the mover. Nothing fun. I'll call a question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is passed. The next one. Recreation Service Delivery Review and Parks and Recreation Master Plan Annual Update. And we have the presentation again. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this evening, this second report is again a direct request related to previous term of council. The Recreation Service Delivery Review passed earlier in 2022. And it was requested that we come back with some information as it relates to a strategy for delivery of the recommendations within the plan in terms of timing and any associated costs. I thought it a good time to actually partner it with the Recreation Master Plan. I don't believe it's been at least a year and a half since I've been here that a plan update has come to committee and or council to understand the Recreation Master Plan and where we're at with that. So that's why I'm here this evening, is to give you an update on both of those. So just ask, you can actually go to the next slide, Trevor. Thank you. So just so you're aware, within the recreation and leisure, the considerations, basically the division in township operations continue to evolve. So outside of these two plans, it's been the last bullet here, impacts of COVID-19. It's been a very rough 3 years within the recreation industry, open, closed, mass capacities, no different than anywhere else. But what we've learned is that our recreation programming and any recreation programming was very well needed and very well liked. And it's part of who we are and what makes us live, I'll say, a happy and healthy life. During COVID, we certainly got outdoors, but the ability to be able to return to full service programming is important. And because of COVID, we certainly have seen, I'll say, some delays in possibly some of the recommendations within the Recreation Master Plan. The other side of it is that we've identified that who we are and what we needed to be before COVID is different now. And COVID has changed how we deliver programming and what people are wanting, and what it's going to look like in the future. So staff continue to identify opportunities. We are looking at what challenges are still ahead of us. How do we continue to improve our services while finding efficiencies? We understand at the end of the day that we still have to be very cognizant of budget, and that it's an area that some people will participate in and some won't. So that's something we need to continue to be very aware of. But the township does continue to experience above average growth. I can share with you that on a regular basis, I will say weekly, if not daily, we see new residents coming into the recreation center saying, I'm new, this is the first time I've been in the center. How do I go for a swim is the first question. The second question is, what else is there to offer? So staff are doing their best to direct them in the right direction to ensure that we can meet their needs where possible. But it is evident that we have a lot of new residents coming in quickly, and how do we continue to grow and keep up with their needs? So within the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, there's 76 recommendations. They are sorted in sections. We are in year 5 of a 10-year plan, keeping in mind, of course, half of that last 5 years we were in a pandemic. We do continuously review it to see what is relevant. And it's something that myself and the team have been going through, saying, is this still what it would be today? The recommendation from 5 years ago. And the dog park is a prime example. The results of the dog park, and now's not the right time for a dog park, is a prime example. That was a recommendation in the master plan to have a dog park. So there's certain things that we're going to see moving forward that we'll have to evaluate as each recommendation is brought up. Identify how best to serve the diverse demographics of our township growth. We do know that as we continue to move forward in each community, we're seeing different types of families moving in, different age groups, and different different ways of how people live and different economic status. And that's something we're going to have to be very prepared for. We see some who are moving in and they're happily retired, and we see others who are moving in and are struggling to put food on the table for their families. So how do we continue to evaluate and meet the needs of everybody? So within the recreation service delivery review, it was just adopted this year. So it was adopted post-pandemic. It does consider our growth. It does consider the impacts that COVID has had on how we operate and what our community is looking for. It is aligned with our national, provincial, county, and township priorities. So when we looked at the recreation service delivery review, the consultant actually referred back to the framework of recreation in Canada. And this is a Canadian Parks and Recreation Association framework. And it actually has a tool for you to be able to go in and evaluate and understand how are you doing compared to the national priorities. So we did go through that, and that was considered within the service delivery review. And we also looked at it to ensure that it complements the recreation master plan. We didn't want it to duplicate the recreation master plan. It needed to complement it and identify more from a service delivery aspect. So relation to other plans and studies is important. So I'm going to pull up on the PowerPoint, you're going to see a couple of slides where you'll see examples of screenshots of the two different plans. So what was attached to the staff report or the council report was reduced, not as many columns as you'll see if you were to open it on my screen. We want to ensure that everything we're doing isn't just for one thing. We want to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all of the different plans and studies if they correlate and or legislation as we're going through these studies. So it's everything from the master plan and the service delivery review to asset management planning. How does it fit in with the strategic plan, and knowing moving forward that we're going to have a new strategic plan, how does it then fit in with that plan? And then of course, any of the legislated. We'll move on to the next. So this is an example, a very quick screenshot, and I'd be happy to share it with you after if you'd like. But it's a very quick screenshot of the plan and how we're using it more as an action plan and how we're using it on a daily basis to track what we're doing, what the recommend. So the far left is the recommendation, who the lead role is, the support person, and then how does it correlate to all of the different plans and studies, as well as then the required resources and the goal completion date and status. So for instance, within the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, there are some items that you'll see are blank under the required resources and or completion date. Those aren't recommendations that we've even contemplated at this point. Some of them do, if you go through the full plan, some of them would have some dollar figures associated to them for the future. Others don't. It's more about staff time, community consultations, those types of things. They wouldn't have a specific number in terms of, let's say, hiring a consultant for $75,000 as an example. So this is how we've laid out the Parks and Recreation Master Plan to see how it correlates. And then if you go to the next slide, this is then the service delivery review. And you can see this one we've populated a bit more. We're still updating the Recreation Master Plan document. This again is all of the different recommendations with the key action items. The service delivery review is set up a bit differently than the master plan, and then how it relates to all the different plans and studies and who's responsible. So to answer the question that came from council, in 2023, a lot of the work that's going to be done is staff time, and it's, I'll say, housekeeping. It's things like policy review and implementation. So access to recreation policies would be one of them. An access to recreation policy could have budget impact in the future, and it might not. It all depends on how we set that program up. There's good examples throughout the province where there's an actual budgeted dollar figure on how the program is applied. And there's good examples across the province where there is no budgeted dollar figure, and there's a way to get around it without having an impact on the taxpayer, but still ensuring you're providing services to those who necessarily might not be able to afford the registration fees. So those are things in 2023 that we'll bring forward to committee of the whole to have some discussions with you on what you would like to see moving forward, and provide you with some options. The other thing that we'll look at in 2023 is an equity, diversity, and inclusion policy within recreation. And that does correlate with the access to recreation policy. So there are some things in 2023 that are going to happen, but none of them have a direct impact on the operating budget outside of staff time that's already budgeted for. Moving into 2024 and 2025, that's when we're going to be looking at some expenses as it relates to a Parks and Trails master plan that's recommended in the plan. And then into 2026, 2027, you're going to look at the expenses related to updating the recreation master plan. Those are some of the bigger ones. Within the Parks and Recreation master plan, there are more costs associated because it does talk more about infrastructure. Whether it be the community hub, a splash pad, those types of things, where the service delivery review is more about how are we serving the community from a service perspective. One thing I did want to note was how I'm working with the team to make sure these are daily living documents. We want to make sure these aren't just sitting on a shelf collecting dust. How are we ensuring that these are driving the priorities and that they are guiding us on the work we do day to day? And if there are priorities that are coming out that aren't within that plan, then we adjust the work plan accordingly, because we know that's going to happen. If that's one thing we learned through the pandemic was things change and they can change quickly. So the team is willing to do that. And but right now, these are the two focuses for us, these two plans on how we're going to deliver these. So from our perspective right now, the recommendation is that you receive the report for information only, and that staff will commit to bringing more updates to you as we move through the term of council, but also as we deal with each recommendation.
Thank you. So, council, do we have questions or comments for discussion on this item? I'm sure
I always have something to say. Is it fair to say, I'm looking at item 1 there on your first document there. So a lot of these things are what I would call living documents, in that, you know, the first one is develop additional programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're always going to be doing that, right? You're never going to have a completion date on that. Fair to say?
That's correct.
And so I think when I read the whole thing, I got the feeling that there's two types of costs. There's the capital cost, for lack of a better word, splash pad, versus the human cost, whether it's programming, et cetera. And that coming out of the pandemic, I think the human side of it's been going pretty well.
That's correct through you, Mr. Chair. At this point, staffing is, our full-time permanent staffing is absolutely solid. It's still trying to find instructors in certain areas.
Just a couple suggestions, maybe programming wise. And Carrie, you mentioned sort of the diversity coming into the community now. Learn to skate program somehow during the day. And again, we'll be getting instruction and so on. And this sort of came up at one of our sessions last week. That's for recreation, maybe some kind of pamphlet, booklet, whatever, that especially in the new subdivisions where we could give them to the realtors or the company and say, you know, here's a starting point for the residents, and it doesn't have to be 20 pages, even a 1-page, you know, here's the contact for this, this, and this. Because as somebody said earlier, you know, not a lot of people necessarily use the internet to find all that information. Anyways,
Thank you. Other members of the council, any comments, questions? Seeing none. Anything further from staff then, or?
The only thing that I wish to comment on is during the pandemic, we didn't do the recreation guide, the large recreation guide that is being proposed to be done again. So you will see those costs reflected in the upcoming proposed operating budget.
Okay, thank you. So council, we have the motion to receive for information. Do I have a mover? Councillor Goodrick, seconded by Councillor Prager. Mover, any comments?
No, just good work by the staff, obviously, it's on one thing, you're doing a great job.
Seconder?
I would just say that, getting to know a lot of people on the recreation side of it, it's been a tough 3 years and appreciate all the struggles we've been through together, and hopefully, we're sort of through that. Just as an aside, I had a picture show up on one of my social media today, being a year ago today, sitting at the lower entrance of the Henderson wearing a mask, checking people out. So we're further ahead and just keep on going, and thanks for your efforts.
Thank you. Other members of council? Comments? I've just got a couple. For one thing, I'm looking forward to the access to recreation policy. That I think that's going to be a very broad document, and it's quite an interesting one too to for us to digest once it's completed as well. And Councillor Frederick, I think hit some of it where COVID had significant impacts on the services for sure, and everyone noticed that, but it also had great impacts on the staff. So I'm really pleased that the staff have hung in there, come back and excelled, and continuing to excel, bringing up recommendations for new programs and new experiences for the residents, because of the departments, every department was impacted, but recreation was one that, as you mentioned, open, closed, maybe yes, but tomorrow no. So it was one that was really a bouncing ball, and so it's really good to see us back and moving forward. And I did notice too, like some of the items on the update. When I read them, I thought, no, we've started that, like ones that were blank, and then I realized, well, maybe not fully started. We're there, we've started the process, but I guess in a way we are not ready to put a check mark beside it that we're on our way. But we have engaged in the community a lot recently, and built partnerships that some we didn't have before, others we've really solidified. So well done. So with that, back to the mover. Any further comment? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion is passed. Splash Pad Feasibility. And I'm assuming there's another, there we are. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the splash pad itself is a different compared to the previous two. This certainly does have hard costs associated to it. But the reason I'm before you this evening was, again, it was a motion from previous term of council directing staff to look into the feasibility of the splash pad and report back. So that is why we're here this evening. So I can just go to the next slide again, Trevor. Thank you. So within the 2017 Parks and Recreation Master Plan, there is a provision for splash pad in there. And it does identify that the location to be determined, whether it be at the W.J. Henderson Recreation Center or alternate locations in either Bath or Odessa. So with that in mind, I thought I'd give you a bit of information about splash pads in general before we get into a bit more discussion. So obviously lots of benefits related to splash pads, the fun outdoor aquatic activity for all ages. The important thing on this one actually is that there's no standing water, which means there's no need for lifeguards, no need for supervision. It is an unsupervised, unstaffed location. So for us, the requirement would be more the maintenance and operation of the system versus the program delivery that you would see at a pool. When you get into wading pools, that's where you need some lifeguards and some staffing, but with a splash pad, you don't. Obviously cooling off without the risk of drowning. For those who don't have access to a pool or don't live on a lake or close to a body of water, this would be a great feature. It does encourage social interaction. I don't know if you've been to a splash pad or somewhere like that where you arrive and the kids just automatically, it's like they've known each other for years and they've just met. And then parents meet and so on. It is an accessible activity for all, so no matter, because it's free use, Everybody can go and use it, and it's also accessible from an actual barrier-free accessibility. So those are the types of features you would work into the design of your splash pad. It is a new amenity and a new level of service, which means it is attractive to our community, to new residents, and potential new residents. These are the types of services that they'd be looking for when they move to a new community. And it is an economic driver. There are people that will say, hey, I am actually going to take my kids for the afternoon and I'm going to drive down the road to a different community to access their splash pad and their amenities. So it will drive some economic benefit to our community. With that said, there's also risks and barriers. So there is still a regulation that we have to follow as it relates to splash pads. We will need to develop best practices for operation and maintenance. There is the different risks as it relates to, obviously, when you're dealing with the water system. So those need to be considered in everything we do. There is still a risk of slips and falls, injuries, those types of things. And then, of course, that would bring an increase to the operating budget, as well as obviously the initial capital outlay. So at this time, I can share with you, and I have asked Phil here in case you have more questions that I might not be able to answer as it relates to the development charges. But a splash pad is considered in the development charges study from 2021. It's considered for 2028 at 500,000 fully funded. I can share with you in 2028 at 500,000, we most likely will not be able to build a splash pad for that much money. We can build it earlier. We would need to make sure that the corresponding decrease from other DC parks and recreation projects. So if you fund it earlier, you have to find that money from a different project from the same study. The current parks and recreation is DCs are maximized due to the community hub project. So that's why we need to find one for the other. And the township could finance the DC eligible portion of the community hub through annual debt payments. So the community hub does have a big impact on this, but it may impact the next DC study. So we get into questions. I'm sure if you have some additional questions on the DCs, our lovely friend Bill will be able to address that for you. So going into the cost to build is very much dependent on size, location, how many features, the operating system, what other site works currently exist at that location, and I could keep going. To say it would cost us $200,000, we probably could build something very tiny and very, you could call it a splash pad for $200,000. But like I said, it all depends. What are the current utilities that are there? Are you building a change facility? Is parking already existing? All of these types of things need to be considered. So when you're looking at locations, those are the types of things that are going to drive the cost up. The access to utilities is another one. You know, how are we connecting to our water, and what are those impost fees, and what does that look like? Those are going to be hard costs directly related to the delivery of a splash pad. Location itself, I spoke to some of these, but definitely we want to find somewhere that has parking. We want somewhere that has washrooms and change rooms available, most likely some picnic facilities, benches, shades. It's great to have offsetting amenities, things like playgrounds, sport courts, other outdoor amenities, green spaces, so that the families can come and play. And if they don't want to be at the splash pad, then another child might be at a playground, those types of things. I will comment that if you've been to the splash pad in Napanee, with the park close to it, the washroom facilities, the trail system, the river, the parking, it's a very well done. It's not a huge splash pad by any means, but it's adequate for the size of that community with all those other amenities that are there. In terms of operating systems, this is where we would have to do some research, and we would have to determine with council how you'd like to move forward with the operating system. So there's two different types. One is recirculating. And just like it says, the water is continually recirculated. The nice thing about this system is it's warmer water because it's being treated and continually cycled through. It's what little kids like, warmer water. Lower water consumption because you're reusing the same water. It is more money to install and operate. And it is more monitoring and testing because you're treating the water. The fresh water system, it's from the municipal source and it's a discharge into the sanitary sewer. It's reduction in risk of contamination, and this is what the health unit prefers. The draw potentially significant amount of water though, so your water rate implications are there. I've spoken to some municipalities who are on recirculating and some that are on fresh water. And I'll say there's not a clear winner as to which system is the best one to go with. So additional research is needed for us to take a closer look at that and determine what's going to be the best for our township. The other thing that we would have to look at is a full operational plan for the splash pad. It's not one of those things where you just build it and they come and you leave it and walk away. It is going to require maintenance. You need to ensure that from a public safety perspective, it's taken care of. Preventative maintenance programs. What is your operating season? So how is it being opened at the beginning of the season and closed properly at the end of the season to protect the asset? And then what are your daily hours of operation? So a lot of splash pads are on timers. And then they're motion activated. So let's say we set it at 9 a.m. and a little girl goes running through at 9:01, the water comes on as she goes running through. Nobody activates that feature for a certain amount of time and it goes off. And then let's say 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. it shuts off and nobody can run through it. It can be very automated in that fashion. It will have environmental impacts, obviously. So that's part of going back to that operating system. There's going to be annual cost for operation, obviously, and then the impact on the asset management plan. Everything has a life cycle and or, there's certain features that may need to be replaced more often than others. And then we also then have to have a plan in place of how are we closing the splash pad due to inclement weather, let's say, or emergencies. So those are all things that can easily be developed, but they're all still things that we need to consider moving forward. So with all of that said, at this point, staff feel that the best recommendation moving forward is that we actually go into 2023 and we do public consultation on a splash pad. Is it still a feature that the community wants? And we do know we've seen some comments in the community saying, what about a splash pad? But given prior experience, I think it's good to do due diligence and to do that public consultation. And that public consultation would include not only do they want a splash pad, but where should it go? What features are they looking for? What would they expect when they arrive to a splash pad? Those are the types of questions that we would be asking. And then while that is happening, staff would do further investigation as it relates to the operating systems, the costs for different sizes. Depending on what locations are being considered, we would then be able to determine what are some of those connectivity costs going to be. Are there already site works in place at some of those locations, or are we starting fresh? Those are the types of things that will need to be considered throughout the process, and that the results of all of that be brought back to committee of the whole for consideration on how to move forward. So it's the recommendation before you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Council, any questions? Councilor Willis.
This is, I believe, for Phil. There was reference to the development charts background study, and that stated just in 2021. So the recent announcement that Umacore is coming and Lake and Pools, are those numbers considered in that development charge study, or do we have more money to spend?
No. Well, okay. That's what it is. So the potential Umacore development and those developments were not built into the growth projections for the industry in terms of setting the rates. In terms of more money to spend per se, the splash pad falls under the Parks and Recreation. Mentions the funding envelope. So what that means is when we do the DC study, certain areas of funding envelopes, which are based on we call it our current level of service, which they break down based on our existing inventory. They figure out a number per capita of what we spend, for example, on recreation per resident, and that's how they calculate the funding envelope. So we're not in the current rate study for Parks and Rec. It's 3.2 million is our funding envelope. So in saying that, that's what we can spend in this current period, the rate. So that's why we're saying if we're pulling it forward, which is totally fine and acceptable, there should be a corresponding offset somewhere else. So in the report where it says that could potentially have future implications, all we're saying is if you want to pull this forward, that's fine. But we're kind of baking that into the next rate as we're spending that money ahead of time. So when we do our next rate, we're already going to be starting at X amount percent.
Thank you.
If that makes sense.
The other, sorry, I can just add the other thing through the chair is just to remember there may be some implications due to Bill 23 on development charges that staff is still sort of assessing what those implications might be.
Thank you. Anything further at this time, Councilor Lowe?
No, I mean, I hope that there is still continued community demand for the splash pad, because especially when we talk about economic accessibility and the fact that we don't have a pool right now and summers are getting hotter, it's something that's needed in the community.
Thank you. Council? Any other? Councilor Parks?
Just a quick question or more statement. Is there opportunities to look at private funding? So for instance, in court, would that be something that staff would explore?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's certainly something that we can look at. I know we're going to be looking moving forward, depending on the status of the community hub, we'd be looking for participation with the community hub as well. I can share that if you go to the Napanee Splash Pad and you look on the wall, there are many partners on that board, everything from provincial and federal grant funding to local organizations, corporations, and not-for-profit agencies that did fundraising for that splash pad. So there are a number of opportunities from I'll say fundraising perspective, naming rights, all of those types of things. So there is certainly opportunity moving forward to try and find alternative funding.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilor Pryor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't know if this is to Phil or who, just the idea of the cost of connection impulse fees. So the township pays impulse fees on their own property, the bill, that's that, the way I understand that?
That's correct, yes.
Is that provincial or?
Impulse fees?
You know, is that a provincial directive or like in the township waive its own impulse fees to itself?
No, so the impulse fees are the way it's calculated is because we're essentially buying up certain capacity essentially. So for us to waive that, we can't pass that on to the other potential.
Okay. You know, one of the things I found when I was going door to door, and a lot of people mentioned this item before and the other item that didn't pass last week. And I think, you know, again, in my experience, with the changing demographics of our township, it would give an opportunity for young families, especially because the growth, at least in the Amherst area and in Odessa, it's young people coming in, and you know, it's a stretch in a sense, but you know, maybe it's part of our climate action too, because we're encouraging people to stay at home, to walk from, you know, parts of wherever it may be. And it certainly fits into, you know, the master plan, helping, engaging. And I think Carrie said something about, you know, West community, because we've all been, you know, my kids are a little older now, but I can remember going to splash pads and you just start meeting your neighbors and things. And, you know, we haven't done that for the last number of years. I guess, you know, the other thing I would say is, and I don't know how the funding models work, but is there an envelope somewhere that, because we make it available to all in terms of mobile blank here, people with mobility challenges, is there any kind of funding that can sort of be part of the whole package? I know there was a time in the previous government where you could apply for instance, installation of elevator, get some support in certain criteria. I guess my thing is, personally, is it something that's probably overdue? I believe that there's a need for it. I believe people want it. And I would encourage staff and this council to move ahead with it. And, you know, I would like to think at the end of this council, there's some capital projects in place. And I know there may be others coming, but that we're not looking at 2010, or sorry, 2028 or whatever. It just seems that the lot we put on, it's very sad, the cost maybe 500,000, but probably not, and even more and more. And if you looked at the staff report, it talked about somewhere here, 2011, it might have cost 121,000. I'm curious about 2016, 400, must be a typo, 470, then 2020 it dropped down to 350,000. I don't know, but we get the idea that it's not getting any cheaper, and it's maybe something we should move ahead for.
Thank you. I just go back to staff with one of the comments, funding. I know that the township is always applying, watching for any funding for anything. Is there any further comment on that from staff?
Just that we are constantly applying for funding. And when Councillor Podrick spoke of accessibility and net funding, we currently look at every time that comes out. We were successful. There are some changes that will be happening to the Odessa office that has been done through that funding. And we are also looking at that to improve the washrooms at the WJ. As another project through accessibility funding for projects. For this, we would be looking at that. There's provincial funding that is we've been quite successful with, which is the OTF. We would be looking at that. We would also, we actively seek out funding, and in terms of private funding, I'm a firm believer in community fundraising and pulling as much together as we possibly can through other different avenues and sources. So we would definitely be looking at all of those sources.
Thank you. Apologize for putting you on the spot on that, but I just kind of wanted to showcase a little bit too, how much funding we do apply for. And we have a very decent success rate as well. So I just like to showcase that every once in a while, that whenever we can. And but that's a great question, because there's more than just government funding, the partnerships and everything that really draws the community in as well. It becomes a community engagement as well. So that's a good idea. Council. Councilor, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment on the if this recommendation goes forward, a comment on the public consultation process, and just for us to keep in mind when doing the public consultation and then interpreting the results. Thinking of when I can imagine when the public is presented with already sort of a particular amenity like a splash pad. Some X% will say yes, X% will say no. But I can imagine that those that say no, some may be saying no, I don't want a splash pad at all ever. Some may be saying no because they might have in their minds something that's a higher priority. And just an encouragement for us and staff to keep that in mind if this goes forward during the public consultation process. And when we if this goes forward in terms of those results. And then just a comment on the for this amenity number that I've seen for municipal standard is one splash pad for 100 children 0 to 9. And reviewing the rec service delivery review that was recently done. Not sure what the involvement, but one thing that really jumped out at me was Loyalist demographics. And it compared to some other comparative municipalities. And it was our population under the age of 15 was or is 15%. That was in 2016. The comparative municipalities were somewhere around 5%. So we're talking double, triple the amount of young people in Loyalist. And under the age of 15, 16 numbers. Well, I might guess that it might be even higher now. The subdivisions and seeing young families move into those. So just. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Parks.
Just wanted to comment on Councilor Ennis's comments too. Not only does it is it available for the children that are 0 to 9 and their families, but it's also available for grandparents, aunts and uncles. I know when my daughter was small, her grandparents took her to the splash pads. That was something that they could do. They could sit and relax and watch her. So I think it covers the whole demographic.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Deputy Mayor. Tom.
Just a question to staff, is working, never mind. Oh, yes, it is, we're a stand back from it, I guess. It might be a bit precipitous, but when might council expect, the public consultation plan to be tabled in this year? And I'm assuming it will be coming to council.
Absolutely. I don't want to be presumptuous and give a date without first having a meeting with our corporate communications department. But that is something that we can have those discussions and get back to you.
That's fine, understood. I mean, I asked the question because I think it's going to be really important that council owns the public consultation process. And I think the previous council has lessons to learn from that. You know, we ultimately made decisions that staff took a lot of flack for. And I think it's going to be really important that we do public consultation right. I know council's going to make public consultation writ large, you know, a greater focus of our strategic priorities, but for something like this that we know is something the community wants and that we want to get right, the council's going to need to really take part in that public consultation process. So all that to say, I look forward to that consultation plan coming up.
Thank you.
Just one more comment. In terms of, I go back, I've been obviously in Loyalist since 70 something, 77. When the library was built and you look at that wall every time you go in there and you see the names of the community, major donors, minor donors. I see my family name in there. And I think there's a possibility of moving some funds that way. I can tell you the North Frontenac Community Center has a wall, Napanee has a wall, Clover has a wall. So there is communities that will jump in and support projects. And you know, it's one of those things that I'm not asking you to do, but I think you'd be surprised with the amount of maybe people out there who want to make some kind of donation to the to such a thing. And I appreciate the deputy mayor comments on consultation. I think that's a step in the right direction, and you know, it takes a few councilors sitting at a table taking some heat. I think that's the best way to go.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? Seeing none. Yes, Councilor Bernard.
I make a motion to accept the recommendation as presented by staff.
So, receiving support, acceptance support. Thank you. So moved. Seconded by Councilor Bucher. Mover, any comments?
My own comment would be, I hope that Deputy Mayor say that we can sort of get a timeline and you know, in a perfect world, the shovels will be in the ground at some point, and then I know that's probably not practical, but you know, I think if we communicate whatever our decision here is to the public, I think there'll be an appreciation for some kind of direction in that sense.
Thank you. Seconder?
This was something I was behind from the get-go, and still would love his support.
Thank you. Other members of council, comments? Seeing none, I'd just like to echo. I think it's time for us to seriously look at this, and the consultation is the first part, and as well as a lot of internal staff work to be able to even come up with enough to go to consultation. So that's going to be a big project in itself. And with the growing, as it's been mentioned several times, the growing community, a lot of younger families are moving in now. But I do have to echo, grandparents love it. I'll tell you, there's nothing like having a bunch of rambunctious grandchildren and you can just let them go and splash. So it's good for all ages. So thank you. So with that, back to the mover. Any final comments? I'll call a question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is passed. That completes the items. So the last one is adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Parks, seconded by Councillor Willis. Pretty sure there's no questions or comments on that one, and I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise a hand. Motion is passed. And we are adjourned.
Now,